We were not fighting men. We were fighting something that had decided not to die. A German soldier wrote that sentence in a private notebook, and he did not write it for anyone else to read. He wrote it because he needed to put it somewhere. By the time he wrote it, he had already survived years of hard fighting on more than one front. He had been shelled, encircled, and shot at by men who knew what they were doing. None of it had prepared him for this. He never says where, he never says when, he never says who. Not yet. This is the story of what happened when soldiers like him were sent to break a single American division holding a small town in the Belgian forest, in the last brutal winter of the war. Their objective looked simple on a map. It did not stay simple for long. This is Bastogne, December 1944. The division was the 101st Airborne. And this account is built almost entirely from the words of the men who were sent to take it from them. The letters they wrote home, the notes they kept for their own commanders, and the sentences they were still trying to finish years later. By the winter of 1944, Berthold Osterkamp was not a man who scared easily, and he had earned the right not to be. He had gone into Poland in 1939 as a boy of 19 and come out the other side of 5 years older than his birth certificate said. He had fought in the East, where the fighting did not stop for weather or for mercy, and he had fought in the West, where it was colder but somehow easier to understand. He had watched friends die in ways that no longer surprised him. He had stopped writing home about the war itself, because there was nothing left in it that his mother needed to know. He kept a small notebook in his coat, the kind meant for supply counts and map coordinates, and by December it had become something else. Not a diary exactly. He would not have called it that. But somewhere in its pages he had started writing down the things he could not say out loud to the men beside him. He did not know yet that the woods outside a small Belgian town were about to give him more to write than he had accumulated in 5 years of war. Delmer Huckaby was 19 when he reached Camp Toccoa, a farm boy from a county where the tallest thing around was a grain silo, and the mountain in front of him looked built to insult him personally. The instructors did not explain themselves. They ran the men up it before breakfast and again before dark, and men who could not keep up were not spoken to harshly. They were simply not there the next morning. Huckaby remembered the quiet of it more than the shouting, how the army seemed less interested in making him strong than in finding out what was underneath the strength, once it ran out. The 101st Airborne had been built that way on purpose. Its officers were not training men to win a fair fight. They were training men who, when the radio died and the map was wrong, would decide it was still survivable, decide there was still a way through it. Huckaby did not understand the point of it at Toccoa. He was too tired to understand anything there. He would not understand it fully until a forest in Belgium, 2 years later, when the training stopped being memory and became the only thing standing between him and the men coming through the trees. The 101st was resting in Reims when the order came, and rest was the one thing every man there actually needed. They had just come out of Holland, out of a campaign that had used up more of them than anyone wanted to say out loud. Boots were falling apart. Winter coats had not arrived. Half the division was short on ammunition it hadn't had time to resupply. None of that mattered on December 17th. The order said Bastogne, and gave them about 18 hours to become an army again. They loaded into open trucks in the dark, packed shoulder to shoulder for warmth they didn't have gear to make on their own, and drove east toward a fight already going badly. Along the way they passed traffic going the other direction, men who had already seen what was coming and were falling back from it. Those men shouted up into the trucks as they passed. Tanks. The SS is coming through. It's already lost. Huckaby heard it. Everybody heard it. Nobody in his truck said much back. The convoy kept moving toward the guns, toward a town nobody in it had heard of a week earlier, carrying less than they needed and more resolve than the retreating men could account for. By the 21st of December, the ring was closed. Roughly 15,000 American soldiers, more of them cooks and clerks and drivers than trained infantry, held a perimeter 50 kilometers around a town most of them could not have found on a map 2 weeks earlier. 5 German divisions surrounded them, with armor and artillery in numbers the Americans could not match in any category that was supposed to decide a battle like this. The cold arrived like a second enemy. It dropped past -20 and stayed there. The ground froze hard enough that digging a foxhole became its own battle, fought with entrenching tools against dirt that behaved like stone. Wounded men who lay still too long began to die of the weather before anyone could reach them. Ammunition was already low, and there was no way to resupply it. There was no way to resupply anything. Kaspar Rehbein started a letter to his wife that week, the first of several he would never finish. He wrote about the size of the ring closing around the town, how it looked from the outside like a formality, something that would be over within a day or two. He did not yet know he was describing the easiest part of what was coming. On December 22nd, German officers came forward under a white flag carrying a written demand. Surrender the town, it said, or face annihilation. It went up the chain to the acting American commander, and the men around him watched him read it, waiting to see what he would say. He said one word. His staff asked what to put in the formal written reply. He told them that word was the reply. When the Germans read it, they had to ask an American officer what it meant, because nothing in their training had prepared them for an answer that short. He told them plainly that it meant go to hell. Osterkamp heard about the reply before he saw its consequences. Those came within the hour, when the order went out to attack the perimeter in force. Tanks moved first, expected to do what tanks had always done to infantry, dug into open ground, break them, or push them back far enough to matter. Rehbein was in the second wave that went forward that afternoon. He did not write about it that night. There was no time, and by the time there was, he was no longer certain what he would have written. The reply had been one word. What came after it was not. Rehbein picked the letter back up 2 nights later, and what he wrote this time was not about the size of the ring. It was about a single position his company had been sent to take, a cluster of foxholes at the edge of the woods that should have fallen in minutes. It did not fall. He wrote that his men had done everything right, the approach, the covering fire, the timing, and it had made no difference. The Americans defended every foot of it like retreat was a word missing from their vocabulary, he wrote, then crossed the line out, then wrote it again anyway. What he was describing, without a name for it, was Wendell Strayhorn holding the entrance of an aid station that same night. Strayhorn was a medic, not meant to be the last man between the wounded and an assault, but the men who could have relieved him were pinned down 30 yards off. He held the doorway with a pistol and a rifle that belonged to a soldier he was treating, for close to 40 minutes, until help finally reached him. When it did, they found 3 dead Germans at the threshold, and Strayhorn still on his feet, a wound in his arm he had not mentioned to anyone. Heinz Vogler was not a man given to speculation. He was a staff officer, the kind who dealt in supply tables and rates of advance, and when his division's assaults kept failing at a cost the numbers could not justify, he wrote it down and tried to find the pattern. His private notes from that week do not mention weapons or terrain. They mention something else. A difference, he wrote, in how the American soldier relates to the idea of retreat. Most infantry, under enough pressure, decide that giving ground is simply the next tactical option. These men did not seem to carry that option with them at all. He was describing, without meeting him, Delmer Huckaby. That same day, Huckaby's position took fire from an armored column moving down the tree line. A machine gun cannot stop a tank, and Huckaby knew it. He had 2 choices, the same 2 every gunner in his position has always had: move or stay. He stayed, firing on the infantry behind the armor until a bazooka team could get into range. The tank's gun found him once. He got back up, found his weapon, and kept firing until the column broke off. Vogler never learned his name. He only had the pattern. Osterkamp sat down 2 nights before Christmas and tried to write to his wife. He had done this dozens of times across 5 years of war, and it had always been the easiest letter in the world, because he had always believed the same 3 or 4 things about how it would end, and a man can write endlessly about a belief he still holds. He got 4 lines in and stopped. What he wanted to say was that he no longer knew what he had believed for 5 years. Not the politics of it. He had stopped thinking about that before Bastogne. He meant something smaller and harder to admit. He had believed, the way a man believes the ground under his boots, that trained will and superior force were the same thing, that enough discipline applied correctly would always break anything in front of it. He had watched that belief fail for 4 straight days in a forest he could still smell on his own coat. He did not write any of that down. He folded the paper, put it back in his coat pocket, and told himself he would finish it later, with better words. He would carry that same unfinished page through Christmas, through the worst of it, and past the end of the war. Christmas morning began before light, 5 divisions moving at once against the perimeter in the coldest attack of the siege. For a few hours it worked. German armor pushed into the western edge of the town, further than any assault had reached before it. Word went back that the line had broken. It had not. What had broken was the outer edge of it, and the men behind that edge moved forward to close the gap, fighting room to room with rifles, grenades, and whatever was in their hands when the Germans came through. By nightfall, the ground was American again. It had cost more than any single day of the siege, and it had bought back exactly what had been lost that morning. No more, no less. Osterkamp did not fight that day. He sat with the report of it afterward, took the letter from his coat pocket, and finished the sentence he had abandoned 2 nights before. He did not send it for another 18 months. Elsewhere on that same line, Strayhorn checked the last of his wounded and sat down against the frozen wall of the aid station. A few hundred yards off, Huckaby cleaned his gun in the dark and said nothing to anyone. The guns had gone quiet. Neither of them trusted it yet.